Well, it's us again, GTN Coach's Corner. Grab yourself a cup of tea as we answer some of your brilliant questions and attempt to answer them as best as possible as if we are your own coach. So, straight in with the first question.
Yeah, we've got this one from Oliver Gunning. Do you have any advice for nutrition or recovery when competing in 2 warm weather races with only a week in between? I struggle quite a bit with heat normally, as I'm from the glorious UK, so I'm not as adapted to the warmer climates. Well, it sounds like, Oliver, you're asking 2 questions there. So if we first address the nutrition aspect, and that's very much about what you're doing before and during the race, that's going to help you with that. And I think hydration is going to come up top, isn't it? If you're competing in hot conditions, you want to make sure you're fully hydrated before a race. But if you've got a second race coming up, you also want to make sure that you've addressed that during your race. I'm not sure what distances these are, but dehydration after an event can take a lot out of you and takes your body a long time to get all those minerals back in. So this isn't just about fluids, it's about actually making sure you've got the electrolytes. And it might be worth, if you've got time, doing a bit of investigation to find out your sweat rate and the amount of actual sodium that you lose, your sodium loss in your sweat. So you can really dial in that hydration plan during your race and also help with that rehydration afterwards.
Yeah, and to be honest, this is exactly the same as your day-to-day training. If you were to inadequately fuel or hydrate during a training session, that's going to have big consequences in future sessions. Also worth bearing in mind just your general intake of foods and making sure that you're being healthy, getting some leafy veg, greens, fruits, vegetables, etc., etc. I think I've said vegetables twice there because they're really important. But generally just trying to be really healthy after a race. I think we can all slip into the mistake of basically just eating rubbish after a race because our body's sort of craving all that sort of stuff.
You don't normally have a second race, do you? So you're just like, oh yeah, chips and whatever. Yeah. But actually you'll be also quite run down. So you need to make sure that you're looking after your immunity at the same time so that you are well for that. And then as for your physical recovery, I mean, I think that's the same as like after a hard training session or anything, you need to make sure that you're getting plenty of rest, but you're also being active and you're keeping moving because your body would shut down, especially if you've got another race soon, but trying to get plenty of sleep and all those kind of normal aspects. And also, if you can do anything beforehand in terms of heat preparation, so maybe you've got a sauna, you can go to your gym or anything like that that can just help you acclimatise beforehand would help as well.
Yeah, and touching on that, if you are staying in these hot climates between the 2 races and you're not prepared for that temperature so much, don't just stay out in the heat hoping that you're going to adapt between those 2 races. It's too late. Just try and keep yourself cool between, recover adequately, and then, deal with it on the day.
Exactly. And good luck.
Yeah, best of luck. Next one from Ricardo Biagoni. Hi, wintertime is usually when we all do some more strength trainings like squats, etc. How many and especially where do you put those sessions in the week schedule? I usually do 2 or 3 strength trainings every week. In a day I have an easy swim session, aerobic bike or run. However, I always find it difficult to add strength sessions among the usual other trainings. How do you recover the day after? There's a lot of questions going on.
There are, aren't there? Well, I'd like to start off by saying, Ricardo, that you're on a really good point with the frequency of your strength sessions. Like 2 to 3 is the perfect amount for seeing adaptation. So keep that up. But when you're saying, the day after to recover, you're going to have to train tired when you're doing strength training to a certain extent, and it's a matter of working out whether for you that works best to actually do the harder training sessions on the day of the gym session, whether you want to do that, say a hard run first and then gym later, or vice versa, because one is going to be slightly affected by the other. So which is the priority? And I sometimes find that actually if I've done hard gym one day, I'd find running hard the next day harder than I would the same day because I've got more DOMs. But then also if you're wanting to do an intense swim session and you've done a leg session the day before, then that shouldn't really affect it too much other than being overall tired. So you've got to plan quite well and maybe trying to reduce a bit of the intensity of the bike or the run if you've done a really heavy leg day. And it's going to take some planning with your schedule of working out where those priorities are and not being afraid to train when you're a bit tired as well.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest juggling acts as a coach or an athlete. As Heather's touched on, if you've got a key run or bike workout that you really want to nail each week, of course, there's no harm in doing them fatigued some weeks, having done a gym session, but if you really want to get the quality out of them, then it's worth just making sure that your schedule fits that and you're not doing a hard leg session in the gym that morning or the day before. But equally, feel free to mix up some weeks. I remember actually when I was training, I always used to do a gym session the day before, swim on a Thursday, and it was like death trying to get through that swim.
Yeah, you feel like you just can't get your arms out of the water, don't you? But, you've got to get used to it and embrace it. And if it's, say, you've got a fairly steady state bike session the next day, that doesn't matter if you feel a bit heavy, especially if it's on the turbo, you're safe, your muscles are going to be fatigued. But if you're trying to actually work in a fatigued state, it can help you.
Yeah. Next question. This is a really good one. We've had this a few times now. Tom Sorrell, how important is an off-season for amateurs? And we've brought this one up again because this year has been a slightly different year. Now, ordinarily, if you had a jam-packed season, I would recommend that it's really beneficial to have a little bit of an off-season, or at least just a week or so where you really just chill out, both for mental and physical kind of recuperation. However, if your season has been disrupted a lot or you just haven't raced much, then maybe you don't need that week or so off in so much of an off season.
And I think the whole, we've talked about it and we've kind of delved in, I guess, coming from the elite athlete background of what even is an off season? If you are an amateur and you genuinely love just doing your sport, do you have to have that time off? And I don't even know if you have to, but it depends how you do it and how much you're pushing your body. And if you're following a correct program, you should have sort of peaks and troughs with the intensity of it anyway. And if, say, your training is doing a social run every week and a social bike ride every week, and that counts as normal training, then you don't necessarily need to have a break from that either. So it really does depend on what is right for you and what background you've come from. And I know when we've talked about, yes, we must have this break, and because that's what the pros do. And some people do message in and say, well, it makes me happy going out for a run. Well, we don't want you to take out something that's making you happy, as long as you're not getting injured and you're not getting stale. Then keep doing what you're doing. Yeah,
I guess the key is figuring out where your A races are in the year and what you're really focused and excited on sort of trying to perform at. As we've mentioned before, you can't be in peak performance all year round, so don't start knocking out amazing sessions 4 or 5 months out from that race that you want to peak at. And that is why we sometimes talk about the off season, where you're still exercising, but and it's beneficial, but you're maybe just not going full gas. You're maybe just going, enjoying yourself, going for a little mountain bike and doing various other stuff. It's just not so full on.
And the final thing I would say is, if you do watch the pros, at Christmas, most of them will train full on through Christmas, whereas us normal people tend to have a pretty natural break for around 10 days then anyway. So you've also got that to factor in. So maybe, especially this year, because everything's been delayed, keep training a little bit longer and then take your break when you can have more time with your family without worrying you've got to get all those sessions in.
Yeah. We've got another really interesting question from Witty Sitpora. Sorry. Hey coaches, the speed I'm supposedly riding on my Spark trainer seems to be far above what I ride on the real road. Should I pay any attention to that? I don't have a power meter on my bike. Should I plan my upcoming 70.3 based on effort, heart rate, instead of worrying about speed? I've got to say, I rarely look at speed.
Yeah.
It's not something that I've really ever paid attention to, because to be honest, it changes so much out on the road, the hills, the terrain, also the road surface massively impacts that. So if I went out going, right, I've got to average 40 kilometers an hour, I'd be ruined on some courses. So I don't really pay attention to that. And I am aware that on smart trainers, if you're on Zwift, etc., sometimes you're flying along at 40 kilometers an hour, and that's almost impossible for some people out on the real road. I
mean, my first reaction was just don't even worry about speed. If you're on a platform like Zwift, for example, it depends what level you're on, because what bike you've got, whether you're on an aero bike or a road bike, what wheels, how hilly that course is it a drafting event or non-drafting? And a lot of that crosses over, like you say, to the real world. And I mean, I remember when I first started cycling, I used to always have this in my head that if it was slower than 15 miles an hour, that was a terrible ride. And then I used to look at people who lived in sort of the east of England where it's totally flat, and I would ride down in the west of England where it's so lumpy. And you can't compare it. So I would use maybe if you do want to gauge speed on your smart trainer, of using it for getting that perceived effort and just understanding your body a little bit more. And you say you've got power on your turbo, but not out on the road, and that's where the difficulty lies. So use those power numbers to work out how hard does zone 2 feel, how hard does zone 4 or does 200 watts feel like, and get that, and maybe even look at your heart rate to help guide you, and then you can use that when you're actually out riding on the road for the feel, because that takes a lot of training. Yeah,
I would definitely say going by heart rate and feel is the answer for you. So yeah, very good. Next one from Paulie X. Is it a good idea to end zone 2 runs with a short, intense sprint?
Well, Poly-X, I'm not quite sure what you mean by short intense sprint, because if you are just doing like one, say 100 meters at the end of every zone 2 run, I'd say no, that's not going to help you. But there's definitely something in that of occasionally doing some pickups at the end of a run. There's so many benefits to that, but by pickups I mean sort of something that's, say, around 20 to 30 seconds, or maybe 15 to 30 seconds in time-wise, and at around 80 to 90% of sort of maximum effort. So you're not like doing a standing start and going, I'm sprinting, racing my friend to that lamppost. But with those, the focus needs to be on your form. So thinking about running tall, getting your shoulders up and your chest out, and you're really driving with your arms and your legs, and just feeling really good. And this can, if you're really tired, it's often the time you least want to do it, but that's when you can get the most benefit, because you might have felt really sluggish on that run, and you'll do, say, 2 or 3 of these, and you'll suddenly feel like great, and you'll feel like the whole run was great. And it's amazing how it can mentally and physically change the feeling. Yeah,
there's a few things here around the sprints at the end. As you've just said, when we finish a run, we can quite often end up with quite poor technique where we're fatigued. So actually ending with really good technique, which you're often forced into doing when you run at pace, is really good, and it kind of really enforces that. The other thing, it really does depend, as Heather said, like why you're doing it. Sometimes actually including a short sprint into a run, it's not necessarily impacting you and fatiguing you massively, but it may just wake your body up. It may be exactly what you need after a real hard day of training. We've done some hard bike, for instance, and it just wakes the body up. We do similar things on the bike and in the water, just these short sprints and pickups just to get the body moving again. So in short, you're not wrong, but it just depends why you're doing it. I wouldn't necessarily say you need to be doing it at the end of every single run. No, exactly. Choose the ones that when you're feeling a bit sluggish. Yeah. Okay, I think this is we've got 2 more questions. Luke Higginbottom, I'm doing an FKT, a fastest known time, in January next year. It's a marathon distance and all off-road, so wondering if you have any tips on how to run comfortably with all my hydration and fuel for the run, for the event, and longer runs in training before. Well, first things first, it sounds like you need a hydration vest. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's definitely your starting point, isn't it? And you've got options with hydration vests. You can either have soft flasks or hard flasks. If you're trying to carry more water, probably you want something soft. And they'll often have ones that can sit just sort of on the front. And then if you want more, which it sounds like you're going to need, is a bladder of some sort of form that sits on the back, and then the tube comes over. And you need to look at packs that are going to tick the right amount of fluid for what you think you'll need. Yes, it's going to be in the winter by the sounds of it, but also what your goals are beyond that if you want to be doing even longer races. And also, just aside from the FKTs, just forgetting that altogether, I used to do a lot of long runs in my training before GTN days, and some of my runs were 2.5+ hours, and I'd never take hydration vests, might just grab some water on the way, and I'd be ruined after them. Whereas now I've started doing a lot more runs with these hydration vests, and I come back feeling obviously a little bit tired, but I'm okay. I'm not absolutely raising the fridge when I get in, because I've been fueling well throughout the whole run. So actually, if I was to go back now and do a lot of those runs, I probably would have a hydration vest with me. I also think, and we've discussed this before, as soon as you put the hydration vest on, you go into a different mind state when you're heading out for that run, and you just back things off a little bit, you fuel adequately, you stop, you walk if you need to, and it just makes it a lot more fun. It's so true. And one other thing, if you don't like something on your shoulder, especially for maybe your middle distance training runs, you can opt for some sort of waist belt, and you can carry fluid and food in that as well, so it just takes a little bit of pressure off. Another option. So final question, Anna Watkinson Powell, how should I train for a marathon whilst also maintaining triathlon training? Most marathon plans involve running 5 times a week, but I worry about overtraining if I'm swimming and cycling as well. Which sessions are most important, and should I do high intensity in all 3? Oh, I think that's a really timely question, Anna, that there's so many people, like we've already touched on training for, half marathons and marathons in the spring, and a lot of triathletes do that. It's quite normal to, in the winter, to maybe want to do a little bit less of the biking or the swimming, because running is easy to fit in with these short daylight hours. And the good news is you've chosen the right one to focus, because swimming and cycling can really help with recovery and just genuinely complement that run training. So I would say yes, you should be okay with 5 runs a week and follow that training program, and then use the swim especially for great recovery. If you start to get any little niggles, or maybe you've got to get that long run in and it's too dark, look at maybe doing a turbo for that and trying to keep it at a nice low intensity. Yes, it's using different muscles, but you're still developing that cardiovascular fitness. Yeah, and with that in mind, it doesn't necessarily mean you may have pluck this marathon training plan out and it's saying run 5-6 times a week, because you are getting some benefit from the swimming, cycling, you may not need to do every single session on that plan. Probably want to still do the key sessions that they're stating, but some of those easier ones, potentially you might be able to just knock 1 or 2 of them if needs be. Also, obviously, it depends when that marathon lies in your season. Is it in the middle of your triathlon season, or is it in advance of it? If it's in advance, then you can really probably just tick along with your swimming and cycling, as you've mentioned, and then pick them up post-marathon. If it's in the middle of your triathlon season, then you may just need to be a little bit creative with the plan and just slotting in some key swim and cycles workouts in there, just to make sure that you are ready for the triathlon season as well as the marathon.
Yeah, I think my final thing, just from my own experience, I would say when you are upping the running, is just be conscious of, if you're doing cycling, of your hips, because they can get really tight from cycling and from upping that running, and it can sometimes just make sure you're putting in a little bit of strengthening and stretching and conditioning in that area.
Yeah, I think that's really important actually, and not just the cycling part, but the fact that you are not only doing quite a full-on marathon plan, you're also filling that extra time with swimming and cycling, so it doesn't leave you much time to just look after your body, and suddenly all that time just slips away. So do try and factor in time to just do a little bit TLC on your body, stretching, loosening off here and there, because before you know it, things can start to creep up on you. And, quite annoying.
Well, Mark, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling really motivated after all of those questions. So hopefully you guys are too. Some great questions about, the spring and the winter and how to approach things. So hopefully that's given you some motivation and some great guidance for the months ahead. And if we've not answered something that you're dying to know and you can't find it, do let us know with the question in GTN Coaches Corner down below.